Dad's friend, and I was remarking to my makeup artist tonight, Kelly, in all the years I worked at NBC and in this business, I never had the pleasure of meeting Dean Martin.
You didn't have Dean on the show at any time?
I've never had him on a show.
Well, no, Dean wouldn't stay up that late to be on the Tomorrow Show.
That's right.
Yeah,
and we belonged to the same golf club in West Los Angeles, and I never saw him there. I never saw him in a restaurant, never met him.
You're actually incorrect, Tom. Dean was not a friend of my father's. He was like a brother. And my father has not recovered from it now.
Really?
It's really crushed him. I called him, Christmas Day, right? You know what I mean? I had just driven all night Christmas Eve into Las Vegas to start on the 26th. And as soon as I woke up that afternoon, my publicist, Pete Mikla, called me. He said, look, I got something to tell you, and I'm afraid it's not going to be very nice to hear. Dean is dead. And I called my father that night, and I actually got him on the phone. I didn't think, he said to me, it's a damn shame. He just kept saying, it's a damn shame, because they were just like brothers. They talked 2, 3, 4 times a week. When I was conducting for my father on the road the past 7 years, he would get up and tell the audience, I just spoke to old Red Eyes, Mr. Martin. And they had such fun together through the years. And Dean was some performer. He really was.
Remember him at the end of his show? He would always leave the audience with my genie and I sit home every night and read your cards and letters.
And cards and letters coming.
And I believed it.
He did. Dean was a great man of the people. Dean had the greatest sense of humor and the most off-the-wall sense of humor. Jeannie would have dinner parties. And every so often, not often, I was not in their immediate circle of friends, but I would be invited, and I would go to their home. And Dean would be at the front door, and there'd be cars parked, and people would be inside, and I'd walk in, and Dean would be looking in the living room at all the guests. He'd be like this. And I'd say, what's the matter, pal? And he'd say, how long do you think they're all going to stay? Right? So then he'd go to the dinner party that Jeannie would have with their friends and everything. Now, after a certain time, when he thought that he'd been there long enough and that the guests had been there long enough, right? Dean would excuse himself, go upstairs to his bedroom, put his pajamas on, get in bed, turn on the TV, and call the police. That's one way to get rid of company. Dean would call the police.
By the way, there's a terrible commotion
That's right.
in my house.
There's a noise downstairs, and he would call the police. And there'll never be another like that man. There will never be another like that man. He was so marvelous on stage.
Remember we did the roasts on TV that get the
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, funny.
It was very, very... Dean was just wonderful. Dean got away. One time he did a thing on one of the early Dean Martin shows. I don't know if you remember this, Tom. It was 65, I think. His guests that night were Roy Rogers and Dale Evans and Don Rickles. So now they do a thing where Dean is Dirty Dan in the black with the black hat. He's the bad guy. Roy Rogers is the marshal, all in white. Dale Evans is the dance hall girl up on the elevated stage, right? And Rickles is the bartender. And the scene opens, the camera comes in on the crane, and everybody's dead, all of bodies all over the floor. And he says, hi, I'm the bartender here. My name's Joe. Rickles says, let me show you how this happened. All right, everybody up. And all the extras got up. One guy took to him. He says, get up, will you, Harvey? We don't want no method extras in this sketch. And he's sitting, he says, last week the sheriff came in, and Dean comes in, and he walks up to the bar, and Rickles was there. This is a true story, and it was on television, all right? Rickles is there, and he's wiping the bar. He says, what'll you have, Dirty Dan? And Dean looks right in the camera. He says, just my usual glass of milk. Are you sure that's my cue card? Right? At that moment, in comes the sheriff, all in white now. Roy Rogers comes in, and he says, all right, Dirty Dan, I've warned you to get out of town, right? We're going to have a duel right now. And they're standing back to back. And Rickles is going to count off 10. They're going to go 10 paces and fire, right? So while they're standing there back to back, Rickles is saying, just think, Roy, you get to stay up tonight after 10 o'clock, huh? Even grown-ups will see you tonight. Did Dean promise you a cookie? Is he going to let you go to the bar later and whatnot? And Roy's going, right? And Dean got bugged because he wanted to get it over with, and very quietly. Now, Roy Rogers is back to back, and the camera's over here, right? And and Dean was going. Finally, to whisper to Roy, he turned around, and he really thought that Greg Garrison, his producer, was going to edit it out. He turned around, Roy, he said, shoot the little Jew. Rickles went stone-faced, right? Rickles went up like this, and the audience at Studio 4, right, at NBC went crazy.
Absolutely correct.
And Roy fell down and laughed, and Dean was standing there. And this was on the actual videotape on the air.
They were great shows.
Well, it was just, you know, it was inoffensively offensive, or offensively inoffensive, because they knew that these guys were friends in Vegas and everything. Dean was so funny.
Let me ask you here about growing up. You know, your mom and dad were divorced, yet they were still your mom and dad. You never had the sense that you didn't have a mother and a father.
No.
There was a team taking care of
I give that
Frank.
absolute credit to the integrity and the honor of both my parents together working as parents. And in this day and age, when divorced families are so prominent, as you know so very well, I hope other parents take the same effort, because it's vital. Absolutely vital.
And how did you come to the understanding that even though mom and dad weren't under the same roof anymore, they were still your parents?
Oh, it was very simple. One day my father sat me down. We were riding in a car, as a matter of fact. He said, look, I don't live with my family anymore. It doesn't mean I don't love you. But that's the way it is, all right? By that time, I was a teenager, but I always had great advice and everything. Every time I needed something, my father was always there with his great advice. Talk to your mother.
We will continue with Frank Sinatra Jr. We'll be playing tracks from the new CD, As I Remember It. We'll be joined by you on the toll-free line right after these messages.